Okay, students, so if we can come back to your business books, we're going to go through the answers to the organic and inorganic growth section. So just as a kind of a big picture link, we looked at the objectives last week of why would a business be in business, and we agreed that profit, growth, return on investment were all key things, that all private sector businesses are trying to make profits. They may not be able to, but that's their willingness to make profits. And we looked at the private sector versus the public sector, that businesses in the private sector make profits, businesses in the public sector might have different objectives. So there's an assumption here that profit is a good thing, and an assumption that to maximize profit, businesses might need to grow. So this first section really looks at the reasons why a business would want to grow and how they would grow. So one of the last activities we looked at was benefits of being big, benefits of being small. The how they grow is two key parts. So one is understanding the difference between organic and inorganic growth. And then another part is looking at different types of integration. So the little examples at the top there, the pictures, you have Amazon buying Twitch, you have Apple buying Beats, you've got Facebook buying Instagram, you have Walt Disney buying up Marvel Studios, SoftBank buying ARM or ARM, and Kraft buying up Cadbury's. So some interesting examples there, because some of those are huge businesses that bought smaller innovative businesses. But in terms of Kraft, when it bought up Cadbury's was more profitable than Kraft. So sometimes size isn't necessarily the thing, but the combined businesses are all going to be bigger than the original businesses. So coming down to it, if you can just get your books open on this page, and we'll add some notes in here. So the definition of a merger, which is kind of linked into this first question, is just when two firms combine. Into one. Mergers and takeovers are quite similar. However, the key difference is that mergers are agreed, and a takeover happens when one business decides to buy out another. So this doesn't need to be agreed. And it tends to be that the firm that does the takeover will be the firm that is left at the end of it. So the kind of Cadbury's and their brands become part of Kraft. When mergers are agreed, sometimes you have combined names of companies. So when Nissan combined with Renault, it was called Renault-Nissan, and both of the companies had interests in had an input into the running of the joint company. You sometimes also see the word hostile takeover. So this is when the current business doesn't want to be bought out, and they recommend their shareholders not to sell their shares. But when firms are PLCs, the firm cannot prevent another firm buying up all the shares. So that's the key difference between a merger and a takeover. The synergy benefits of inorganic growth are to do with the businesses combining and achieving economies of scale. So you don't necessarily need all of the departments, so you can get rid of possibly Cadbury's advertising department, and you just need one department for the two firms. In terms of matching these to organic and inorganic, inorganic uses retained profits. Sorry, organic uses retained profits, so an O next to that one. External sources of finance is inorganic, so going to the bank or selling more shares. Mergers and acquisitions, a takeover, is an example of inorganic growth. Inorganic growth is quick, because you are buying up a fully formed company. Organic growth is slow because you are having to gradually reinvest your profits and slowly increase your scale. Inorganic growth is high risk. Organic growth is low risk. Inorganic growth will increase the debt of the business. It has high returns in the short run in terms of inorganic growth, because you're buying a fully made company, and organic growth will have low returns in the short term. So until you gain scale, it will be harder for you to make profit. That also leads to some of the costs and benefits of organic and inorganic growth too. The maths challenge part. So looking at this, there's not a right or a wrong answer. There's a few different ways to look at it. So the question says, as a shareholder, which company would you want your company to take over? So just imagine this is company A, company B. You might be Unilever, and you're looking at food producers and thinking, who would you want to buy? So you have sales growth per annum. So this is how fast companies are growing. So this is rapid growth. That might be one thing you look at. So this company is growing very quickly. Company C and company A is growing very slowly. In terms of sales, again, company C looks very attractive because it has a large amount of sales. However, it's currently making a loss. So if you're looking at this firm, you are looking at possibly a revenue max strategy going forwards, and it does have a significant amount of debt. So it's grown rapidly, it's grown inorganically potentially because it's got debt. So there's potentially risks around that, but also potentially high reward. Company A has the lowest sales, but it does have the largest profit margin. So in terms of dividends and returns on investment, even though it's a smaller company, it's more profitable. It also has very little debt, so lower risk. So different ways of looking at companies in terms of sales, revenue, profits, and debt. If it was an exam question, so this is the exam question that was linked to the objectives of the lesson, which was explain 2 ways in which a business can grow. If that question does come up, the 2 ways that the examiner wants you to analyse this is to explain organic growth. And the way you explain organic growth is through that process of reinvesting retained profits. And you can give examples of firms like Subway that has done that and it's taken its own profits. It's highly likely that you'd get given a case study where one would be obviously organic and one would be obviously inorganic. And then the opposite, or the other point of view, in terms of the second way, would be inorganic. And there you would talk about external sources of finance, mergers and acquisitions, and examples like those ones at the top, perhaps Apple and Beats, or any of those that you're looking at there. So that would be how you would answer that question. Just add a few notes as we're going along to that as well. Okay, so the next section is around economic integration. And I'm going to give you a little bit of time to read through the economic integration part of this. What I'd like you to do, so you've got different types of economic integration. You've got horizontal integration, an example of Facebook and Instagram there. You have vertical integration, which is an example of the Premier Inn hotel chain and Whitbread, the brewery. You've got backward vertical integration with Netflix, and you've got conglomerate integration with Samsung and also Tata. The activity that you've got is filling in this table. So if you have a look at the table, you've got definitions, and there's one given for you there, which is same industry, same stage of production. The other definitions have the word industry and they have stage of production in there. And all I'd like you to do is to kind of initially put down what you think in terms of how you would define that type of integration. Then I'd like you to think about an advantage and a disadvantage for each type of integration. So if a business grows through horizontal integration, what's the benefit of that? But also what's the disadvantage of that? If you do this quickly, you can kind of look ahead a little bit at demergers and have a little read of that. And we'll come to that a bit later. But if we just take about 6 or 7 minutes to read through that and to fill the table out that comes after it. So economic integration, read the section, go to the table, fill out as much of it as you can, and we'll go through it in about 6 or 7 minutes. Okay, so if you want to finish off whichever one you're doing, and we will go through those key definitions, advantages and disadvantages. If you can just make notes as we go along. Okay, so we'll do the definitions first, then we'll go through advantages and disadvantages. So horizontal integration is when firms in the same industry buy another firm at the same stage of production. So a manufacturer buying a manufacturer, Tesco buying Sainsbury's, Vodafone buying Three. So same industry, same stage of production, the same goods, they're kind of in the market. So what you've effectively got here is you're buying your competitor. Vertical forwards is same industry. At the next stage of production, so within the supermarket market, Tesco buying one of its customers. Not a good example. Better to think of that example of Whitbread buying a hotel. So a brewery that sells alcoholic drinks buying a restaurant or a hotel group. Vertical backwards is same industry, but it's at the previous stage of production. So this would be Tesco buying one of its suppliers. So maybe buying a farm or buying a food producer like, say, Kellogg's. In terms of the last one, conglomerate, it's a different firm. It's going to put diff here, you could write a different, and at any stage of production. So if you're buying a firm in a different industry, it doesn't matter if they're also a producer. So it could be that Tata Steel that manufactures cars buys a food manufacturer. It's a different industry, same stage of production, but it could also be that Tata buy a steel manufacturing plant as well as a freezer, washing machine manufacturer. So different industries, any stage of production. In terms of the advantages, well, if you reduce the market share, you will very quickly be able to increase your profits. As you gain price control powers. A disadvantage of this type of integration is that there may be government intervention to reduce monopoly power. So most markets internationally, especially within the EU, the UK and America, we all have anti-competitive parts of the government which investigate markets, Competition and Market Authority in the UK, but we'll also look at that in a bit more detail in future. Also, you could gain diseconomies of scale. This isn't a topic that we've done, but that acronym stands for diseconomies of scale, and that might reduce your efficiency. So if you get too large within a market, you may reduce efficiency. In terms of a linked point for that is you may also gain economies of scale on this side. So you're a larger producer, and what that does is it reduces your costs, which also benefits you in terms of profit maximizing. So market share would increase your sales. It also would allow you, because you've got a greater market share, to increase your price whilst reducing your costs. So that all links together into that profit maximizing strategy. If you buy one of your customers, so vertical forwards integration, and what that allows you to do as a business is to control your product. And this would allow you to prevent discounting. So if you are a manufacturer of cars and you sell them to garages, then those garages can potentially discount and affect your product. But also you increase your profit margin as effectively you are bringing into your business the next stage of production. So if you take out a stage of production, you take out their profits and you make it part of your own profits. A downside of this is you may not have the expertise to be good in that market. So if you are a manufacturer, there's no guarantee you are going to be good at sales. You may also get cultural conflict. So the business, what that means is that just the businesses are run differently. You can be quite a supportive manufacturing plant, but people who do sales tend to have, let's say, sometimes less of a moralistic judgment about who they are selling to, and they may be good at sales, but they might not be the same type of people that you want in your organization. So you can create cultural conflict. In terms of buying an earlier stage of production, so again, you are buying your supplier, and by buying out your supplier, again, you are increasing your own profit margin. That does also, because their profit margin, it does guarantee you supply. So you can control your supply, and that in itself would reduce your costs. So you don't have to shop around or have a department that is involved in purchasing, because you are guaranteed that supply just becomes part of your operations. In terms of the downsides of that, once you are tied in, you have a lack of choice. And you can't then find a different supplier, and it may affect the quality of your product. So if you have multiple suppliers and the quality of one supplier goes down, you're able to switch supplier. Whereas in this case, you're stuck with your supplier that you've bought because they are now your company. And again, you also have that additional point of either a lack of expertise or a cultural conflict. So there's no guarantee that Nissan would be good at producing steel or managing a steel plant. So they may be affected by that. And if the quality of steel drops, then that impacts, and they don't have the ability or a very quick ability to change supplier. Different stage, any stage of production. The key reason for this is to reduce the risk of a business. So in business studies terms, this is sometimes called diversification. That's not an economic key term. It's a business key term, but if you do business, it'll make sense to you. And this is about reducing the risk of the overall business, because if you're in multiple markets, then it allows you to be more financially stable. Sometimes what it allows businesses to do is to enter growing markets and leave shrinking markets. So two good examples of this, Nokia, which still produce phones, but it's not the same company it used to be, but it was the most significant mobile phone producer in the 90s. And what it started off was as a Wellington boot company. Also, one of the world's largest advertising companies, WPP, started off making wire shopping baskets for supermarkets. So being a conglomerate reduces the risk because you're in many markets, but also allows you to continue growing as a business and leave markets that are shrinking without it damaging your business. In terms of the downsides, again, you can have cultural problems. You can have over trading due to inorganic growth. So a company grows too rapidly, takes on too much debt, and this could lead to a bankruptcy of that business. So before you are able to take advantage of those different markets, you just financially become insecure and end up going out of business. Okay. So we've kind of come to a natural pause, and depending on the time that we've got to, I'm going to ask a few little key questions, and we might just introduce one last little activity before the end of the session. So what I'd like you to think about, just for a moment or two, is, and if you can get your whiteboards out to test yourself on this, think about the different topics that we have looked at today. So you've got, we looked at profit maximization as an exam question first. Then we looked at organic and inorganic growth. We've also looked at the principal agent problem, and we've also looked at different types of integration. So we'll work our way back through things just very quickly. So I'm going to ask you for three things: the definition of vertical integration, the advantages of horizontal integration, and let's say vertical backwards, and the disadvantages of conglomerate. So let's put your notes away initially for this activity, and just have a think for a minute about how you would define vertical. Put that down your whiteboard, how you would explain advantage of horizontal, and how you would explain a disadvantage of conglomerate. So just a quick minute or two to think about that. Okay, so remember the definitions always talk about industry and stage of production. So vertical backwards is same industry, I'm going to put SI, and previous stage of production. So SI, PSOP stands for same industry, previous stage of production. In terms of horizontal, the advantages, that was same industry, same stage of production. It was about reducing competition, increase in prices, reduction in costs due to economies of scale, and then an increase in the ability to profit maximize. And our conglomerate was the example where different firms at any stage of production in different industries combine. And the disadvantage here were cultural problems, and that comes under also diseconomies of scale. But we also mentioned overtrading due to significant amounts of debt. Okay. Organic and inorganic growth. So again, how would you explain, what kind of key terms would you write to explain how companies grow through organic growth and how companies grow through inorganic growth? So again, minute very quickly, wipe your whiteboards clean, and let's see what you remember about those two different types of growth. So put a line down the middle of your board, O on one side, I on the other. What do you remember about those different types of growth? 1 minute. Okay. So organic growth, that was the one that was about retained profits. It was slower, tend to be long-term growth. It was about reinvestment. It was about, think about an internal source of finance, and it's growing the current company. In terms of inorganic growth, that was about external sources of finance. This was quick, and it involved a new company or companies combining. And that would lead to a much greater increase in profits in the short term. Okay. So this is what we looked at to start with. I explained 2 ways in which a business can grow. We assessed whether horizontal integration will necessarily benefit shareholders. We could look at that in terms of the increase in profits. That would give us one side, and then we can also look at the negatives of the intervention of the Competition and Markets Authority, and also any of the other negatives of horizontal integration around diseconomies of scale due to inefficiency, so communication or coordination problems there. We looked at big and small firms, why you want to be big and grow, why you want to maybe be small. So big linked to horizontal integration, reducing competition, reducing costs, linked to conglomerate integration, reducing risk, securing future, linked to business objectives, revenue maximizing, managers making bigger pay packets for themselves, and growth internationally. And then we looked at small, which kind of links a little bit to inorganic growth, so more responsive, niche markets, survival in the early part, so linked back to business objectives and the product life cycle, competing internationally if a small market, but also avoiding inefficiency, so avoiding some of the negatives of those integration models. We also looked at the principal agent problem, and we looked at the principal being the shareholder who hires the CEO to run the business, but that they both have a lack of compatibility of incentives and they're acting in their own self-interests. And this divorce of ownership causing a problem in that the conflict in those objectives means that managers may focus on revenue maximizing, whereas the shareholders would prefer them to focus on profit maximization, which would maximize their revenues. And we had a little look at an exam question where there was a model answer looking at discuss the extent to which profit maximization is the main objective of all businesses. And we said it is rational. And the reasons for that was because profit is the long-term objective. It allows growth, it allows dividends, and it allows reinvestment, which allows the business to grow further. And we said the negative, or the opposite point of view, would be that in the short term, another objective might be appropriate. And this one looked at survival in times of recession, and a reduction in the scale of operation to keep in business. The slightly better version of that example used Facebook to look at having high revenues initially, and in the short term having gained economies of scale, so surviving being more appropriate. And we used the specific key term definitions within that to explain that part. And the very start, we looked at some examples of objectives and a judgment based on what would be the most appropriate objective in those situations. There's one final thing I'm going to do, but I just want to remind you that the tasks for this week will be the same as the tasks for last week in terms of when they are coming. If you still have your Vespa forms to fill out and submit on Teams, but this week should look like this. So up to Friday, you're going to have your new knowledge check, multiple choice on Teams. You've got your next reading if you are doing the reading in the booklet, you should be doing it on Teams so we can track it. But this week, if you take a photo of it and send it to me, at least I can see you've done it. Then up to Sunday will be your knowledge check 2, so another multiple choice quiz, and then the first real essay to do in your Purple books. So you need to take your Purple books home today and do that first example answer in your Purple books. The other thing that we need to be thinking about this week is what your personal statement might look like on UCAS. So some of you have already started saying your personal statement, and we may want to kind of look at that from a subject point of view to think about what your vision is for next year. So the key thing for this week is to try and get into this habit. We need to get into this quite quickly. If you're having any issues, you need to get in touch with me to let me know about that. But the first part of the week is read up, second part of the week is write up, and the final part is warm up. So within that last section, you should be reading ahead in your business book, having a look at demergers and costs and revenues for the next lesson.